My wife cheated on me and planned to leave with her boss, so I collected evidence and exposed them both. Hey everyone, I never thought I'd be posting here, but I need to vent and maybe get some advice on what to do next. My name's Matt, and my wife, Lisa, and I have been together for 8 years, married for 5. Up until a few months ago, I thought we were solid. You know, like one of those couples you see on TV or social media, happy, joking around, and always having each other's backs. But lately, I've been feeling like a fool. There have been these subtle, almost imperceptible changes in her behavior, and at first, I brushed it off as just stress from her new promotion. She's been more distant, her laughter is shorter, and her smile never quite reaches her eyes anymore. I tried to talk to her about it, but she always had an excuse: work's busy, family stuff, or she's just tired. I started to doubt myself, thinking maybe I was overanalyzing things. But deep down, something didn't sit right. There was this growing sense of unease, a nagging feeling that things were slipping through my fingers, and I couldn't quite grasp why. That's when I noticed her texting a lot more than usual. I'd glance over, and she'd snap her phone shut or flip the screen away from me. She'd laugh softly, like there was some private joke that I wasn't a part of. It hurt. I mean, we used to share everything, every little inside joke, every meme that made us smile. Then one night, something odd happened that pushed me to start digging deeper. Lisa mentioned she had a work dinner. It's not like this was unusual, she's in corporate sales, and entertaining clients is part of her job. But when she came back that night, she was wearing a perfume I'd never smelled on her before. It wasn't her usual light, floral scent, it was deeper, more exotic. I asked her about it, and she casually said it was a new one she'd picked up during a lunch break. It seemed innocent enough, but the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. Why change your scent all of a sudden after years of sticking with the same one? I'm not proud to say it, but I started snooping. It began with her phone bill, which wasn't hard to access since we were on the same family plan. I noticed a new number, someone she texted dozens of times a day. I didn't recognize it, but the frequency was alarming. I stayed up that night, staring at the screen, my mind racing. Who was she texting? What was she saying? And why didn't she feel she could talk to me like that anymore? I didn't have the courage to confront her right away. Instead, I waited and kept watching. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, walking on eggshells, pretending everything was fine when all I wanted was to grab her phone and scream, "Who is he?" But I needed proof before I did anything rash. So, I bided my time, pretending to believe her every excuse, every lie. And then, I found out. That weekend, I told Lisa I had to go out of town for a work conference. It wasn't a complete lie, my boss did mention a possible trip a few weeks ago, but I never confirmed it. The truth was, I needed an excuse to be away for a few days, leaving her alone to see what she'd do. The night before I left, I set up a small, hidden camera in our living room. I hated doing it, felt sick to my stomach even, but I knew I couldn't keep living in this shadow of doubt. I just needed to know if I was being paranoid or if something was actually happening. I made a big show of leaving early the next morning, kissing her goodbye and telling her I'd call her every night. She smiled and told me to have fun, but I could see a flicker of something in her eyes, relief, maybe? It sent chills down my spine. I didn't go far. I checked into a cheap motel about 20 minutes away and set up my laptop, connecting it to the camera's feed. Then, I waited. For hours, nothing happened. She moved around the house, made some coffee, and settled down with her laptop. I was almost ready to shut everything down and chalk it up to my own insecurities when, around 5 p.m., the doorbell rang. I sat up straight, my heart pounding. I couldn't see who it was, but Lisa's reaction was telling. She jumped up, a smile stretching across her face, one I hadn't seen in a long time. A smile that wasn't for me. She opened the door, and in stepped a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair slicked back in that trendy but effortless style that people in their 30s seem to wear. He didn't look like someone she worked with, he wasn't wearing a suit or business casual attire. He was in jeans and a plain t-shirt, comfortable, like he belonged there. I watched in horror as they embraced. It wasn't a casual hug. It was lingering, intimate. She rested her head on his chest for a moment, and he kissed the top of her head. That's when it hit me, this wasn't something new. This was an old, familiar routine. Whoever he was, he had been around for a while. My stomach turned as they moved to the couch. She sat close to him, her legs tucked up under her like she always did with me during movie nights. They started talking, laughing even. I couldn't hear them, but it was clear from their body language that this was more than just an affair. There was a closeness there, a comfort that came with time. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, and then leaned in, whispering something that made her giggle like a schoolgirl. I clenched my fists, every muscle in my body screaming at me to drive back there and break down the door. But I didn't. I kept watching, my eyes glued to the screen as if the sheer force of my gaze could somehow change what I was seeing. And then, they kissed. It wasn't hurried or secretive, it was slow, deliberate, as if they had all the time in the world. Her hands went up around his neck, pulling him closer, and I felt my heart shatter into a million pieces. I could hardly breathe as they broke apart, still smiling at each other. He pulled her closer, whispering something in her ear. And that's when she said it. "Missed you so much, Jake." Jake. That's all it took. A name. A single word, and I was unraveling. Jake? I didn't know any Jakes in her life. How long had this been going on? Was this the guy she had been texting nonstop? I pulled up the phone bill again and cross-checked the number. Sure enough, every single message had been to this Jake. They stayed on the couch for a while, just talking. Then, to my disbelief, she got up and went to the bedroom, motioning for him to follow. I wanted to look away, to slam the laptop shut and pretend this wasn't happening. But I couldn't. I watched as they disappeared into our bedroom, their silhouettes outlined against the wall as they closed the door. My body went numb, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin. I had seen enough. More than enough. I slammed my laptop shut, my mind spinning. What was I supposed to do now? My thoughts were all over the place, anger, betrayal, heartbreak. But most of all, I felt utterly humiliated. She had played me for a fool. I needed a plan, something to hold on to as I figured out my next move. Should I confront her right away? Should I keep collecting more evidence? Should I tell someone? For the first time in my life, I felt completely lost. I spent the rest of that night pacing the motel room, unable to sleep. My thoughts churned like a storm, cycling between rage and grief, plotting revenge and then dismissing it. I knew I couldn't confront her yet. Not without understanding the full extent of her betrayal. If I confronted her now, she'd just deny it or twist it to make me look like the bad guy. No, I needed more than just a blurry video and a single evening's worth of surveillance. The next day, I returned home as if nothing had happened. Lisa was waiting for me in the kitchen, pouring me a cup of coffee. "How was the trip?" she asked, giving me a smile that, for the first time, I realized didn't reach her eyes. It was all a facade, a practiced expression she probably gave to him as well. "It was good," I lied, swallowing the bitterness that rose in my throat. I leaned down and kissed her on the cheek, hating myself for even touching her now that I knew what she'd been doing. Glad to be back. That night, I decided to take the investigation further. I needed to know everything, who Jake was, how long this had been going on, and what kind of person I was up against. I installed a tracking app on her phone while she was in the shower. It gave me access to her location, call history, and even messages. I knew it was wrong, but at this point, it felt like I had no choice. She had shattered our trust, so what was left to protect? The next few days were tense. Lisa was back to her cheerful self, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She didn't suspect a thing. I watched as she texted him constantly, laughing at her phone, then casually putting it face down whenever I walked by. One evening, she told me she had a girls' night out planned for the following weekend. It took every ounce of my self-control not to scoff. This was it. My chance to catch her red-handed. "Sounds fun," I said with a smile, playing the role of the unsuspecting husband. "I'll probably just hang out with some of the guys." She seemed relieved, almost too relieved. It confirmed my suspicion that she'd been using these so-called girls' nights as a cover. When Saturday rolled around, she got dressed up, more than I'd seen her do in a long time. She wore a tight black dress I'd never seen before, styled her hair differently, and even wore a shade of lipstick that I didn't recognize. "Don't wait up," she said, flashing me a quick smile before she left. The moment she stepped out, I grabbed my laptop and opened the tracking app. Sure enough, she didn't head to any restaurant or bar downtown. Instead, she drove across the city to a residential neighborhood, a place I'd never been. I stared at the map as the dot indicating her location stopped in front of a house. My heart pounded in my chest as I clicked through the address details and found out that it belonged to Jake. I felt a surge of adrenaline and panic. What was I doing? Was I really going to follow her there? I paced the living room, battling with myself until I finally decided. Yes, I had to see it with my own eyes. I grabbed my keys and drove to Jake's place, parking a few houses down. The lights in the living room were on, and through the sheer curtains, I could see two figures, Lisa and Jake. They were sitting close on the couch, sipping wine. I clenched the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. And then, as if sensing the universe's cruel joke, Lisa's phone buzzed in my pocket. I had taken it from her purse before she left, leaving a spare in its place. A new message from Jake lit up the screen. "I can't believe we're getting away with this. He has no idea, does he?" I stared at the words, a red haze of anger clouding my vision. My hands shook as I unlocked her phone and scrolled through their chat history. It was worse than I had imagined. They'd been seeing each other for nearly a year. They talked about me, about how stupid and clueless I was, about how thrilling it was to deceive me right under my nose. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. Jake was planning on moving in with her. They'd been saving up for months, and they were already looking at properties. One text, in particular, stood out: "Once Matt's out of the picture, it'll be just us. Can't wait for our new life together." So that was it. They wanted to erase me from her life completely. The thought of them sharing a home, a bed, a life, it made me sick. But I wasn't going to just fade away. No, I'd make sure they'd pay for every single lie they told and every ounce of pain they caused. I wasn't the clueless husband they thought I was. I took a deep breath, collected myself, and drove home, my mind already formulating a plan. I couldn't confront them now. That's what they were expecting, a dramatic showdown where they'd twist things to make me look like the bad guy. No, I'd hit them where it hurt the most, quietly, methodically, and without warning. I was done being a fool. They thought they had the upper hand. But I was about to show them just how wrong they were. After that night, I knew I couldn't just sit back and let things play out. I wasn't going to confront Lisa directly yet, but I had to start building my case. I spent hours gathering as much evidence as I could, taking screenshots of their messages, noting down every address and location they visited together. I copied everything to a secure folder, saving backups in case she ever found out, and tried to delete anything. I also began recording our conversations at home. I installed a small audio recorder in the living room and one in our bedroom. If she ever slipped up and mentioned Jake, I'd have it on tape. It felt strange doing all this, like I was in some sort of crime drama, but this was my reality now. I had to be meticulous. The next week, I decided to take things up a notch. I called in a favor from an old friend, Dan, who worked in real estate. Dan owed me a few, and when I asked him to pretend to be interested in a house Jake and Lisa had shown interest in, he didn't hesitate. He made an appointment to see the house under a fake name, posing as a potential buyer. I wanted to know if Jake had put in an offer or if they were planning on buying it together. The more financial entanglements they had, the easier it would be for me to disrupt their plans. When Dan called me after the viewing, his news made my stomach drop. "Matt, I don't know how to tell you this, but Lisa's name is already on the paperwork. She's listed as a co-buyer." "Wait, what?" I stammered, the phone slipping in my sweaty palm. "That can't be right. We don't have any plans to buy a house." I would know if she was looking to. "She's serious, man. Looks like they're already lining up financing. If they go through with it, she'll have half ownership of the property." I hung up, my hands shaking. It was one thing to cheat, but to start a whole new life behind my back? I couldn't believe the lengths she'd gone to deceive me. There was no way I could keep waiting. They were on the verge of making this permanent. That evening, I sat Lisa down and pretended to be curious about our future. I brought up the idea of maybe buying a new house, just to gauge her reaction. Her eyes darted nervously, and she let out a fake laugh. "Why are you bringing this up all of a sudden? We're fine where we are, right?" "Yeah, we are," I said, forcing a smile. "But, you know, it'd be nice to plan for the future." She shrugged it off and quickly changed the subject. Her deflection was all the confirmation I needed. She was actively hiding her plans. I decided it was time for the next step: destabilize her sense of security. The following day, I made an appointment with our bank. I told them I wanted to put a hold on any joint accounts and that I suspected fraudulent activity. I knew it was risky, she'd get a notification if any money was frozen, and that might tip her off. But I had to be prepared if she tried to drain our accounts or use my assets for their new house. That night, Lisa stormed into the house, fuming. "Why are our accounts frozen, Matt?" she demanded, her voice shaky. "I tried to transfer some money today, and I couldn't. The bank said there's an alert on the account. What's going on?" I feigned confusion, rubbing my chin thoughtfully. "That's weird. Maybe there was some unusual activity. I'll check it out tomorrow. Don't worry, I'll handle it." She eyed me suspiciously but didn't push it further. I could see the wheels turning in her head. Was this the first crack in her perfect plan? It wasn't enough to expose everything, but it planted a seed of doubt. She'd have to wonder if I knew more than I was letting on. The next day, I took it a step further. I called her boss and asked if Lisa had mentioned taking time off. When he said no, I played dumb and told him that Lisa mentioned needing a few days off for some family emergency. He promised to look into it, clearly concerned. Hours later, Lisa received a call from her boss, asking if everything was okay. She was confused and visibly rattled when she got home that evening. "Did you tell anyone I needed time off?" she asked, her voice quivering. "Why would I do that?" I replied, feigning innocence. "What's going on?" I don't know," she mumbled, shaking her head. "Just, never mind." It was working. She was starting to feel the ground shift beneath her feet. She still didn't suspect that I knew about Jake, but the stress and confusion were piling up. Then, I orchestrated my final move for that week. Using a second phone I bought, I texted her from an anonymous number. "I know what you've been doing, Lisa. Does Jake know your husband's onto you?" I knew it was risky, and I watched from the hallway as she read the message. Her face went white as a sheet. She glanced around the room, almost as if she expected me to pop out and accuse her right then and there. Her hands shook as she quickly deleted the message, her breath coming in shallow gasps. I watched as she sent a hurried text to Jake. "Someone knows. We need to be more careful. Maybe we should lay low for a bit." Jake responded almost immediately, "Calm down. It's probably just a prank. He's clueless." Clueless? That word echoed in my mind, twisting like a knife. They still thought I was in the dark, that they had the upper hand. I'd let them believe that for a little while longer. Because soon, I'd hit them with the truth. And when I did, it would all come crashing down around them. After the message I sent, Lisa became paranoid. She was constantly checking her phone, looking over her shoulder, and becoming more irritable. I knew she was close to unraveling, and it was time to push her further. One evening, I casually mentioned I wanted us to take a short vacation, something to reconnect. She hesitated but eventually agreed, probably thinking it'd help calm me down. I suggested we leave the following weekend. She didn't know I'd already spoken to her boss and arranged for her to have time off. That Friday, just as we were about to leave, I made a show of forgetting something and told her I'd be right back. Instead, I snuck into her car and placed a small GPS tracker under the passenger seat. I wasn't planning on going on this trip, I just needed to see what she'd do when she thought I was gone. I left for a hotel on the other side of town, monitoring her movements on my phone. Within an hour, she was at Jake's house. I watched as they stayed there for the rest of the evening, confirming what I already knew. The next morning, I sent her one last message from the anonymous number. "Have fun at Jake's. Your husband will see you soon." She panicked, calling me repeatedly. I didn't answer. Instead, I drove straight to Jake's house. When I arrived, I didn't bother knocking. I walked right up to the front door and rang the bell. Moments later, Lisa answered, her face a mask of horror. "Matt, what are you doing here?" she stammered. "Is Jake home?" I asked calmly. Before she could respond, Jake appeared behind her, confusion turning to shock when he saw me. "What's going on?" he demanded. I smiled, pulling out my phone and showing them the messages, the photos, the proof of their betrayal. "You thought I was clueless. But I've known everything." Lisa's face crumpled as she tried to stammer out an explanation, but I held up a hand to stop her. "No more lies, Lisa. I just wanted to see your faces when you realized it was over." Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving them speechless on the doorstep. I didn't look back. There was no need. I knew I'd broken their carefully constructed illusion. And for the first time in months, I felt free. The confrontation left Lisa shaken, and for the first time, I felt like I had some control over the situation. When I got back home, I locked myself in the bedroom, ignoring her frantic calls and texts. It wasn't long before she showed up, pounding on the front door, begging to talk. "Matt, please. Let me explain," she cried out, her voice muffled through the door. I didn't respond. I wanted her to stew in the mess she created. Eventually, I opened the door. She looked disheveled, her makeup smeared from tears. "There's nothing left to say, Lisa. I know everything. You and Jake, the house, all of it. But I love you," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "It was just a mistake, Matt. A stupid mistake. A year-long mistake?" I interrupted sharply. "You were ready to start a new life with him. You lied, cheated, and were willing to destroy us." She reached for me, but I stepped back, and the distance seemed to crush her. "What do you want me to do?" she whispered desperately. "I'll do anything to fix this." I shook my head. "There's no fixing this, Lisa. You made your choice." The next few days were brutal. Lisa called Jake over and over, but he stopped responding. Apparently, being caught scared him off. She tried convincing me to go to marriage counseling, to talk it out. I refused. My decision was made. I'd already spoken to a lawyer and started the process of separating our assets. One morning, I received an unexpected call from Jake's wife. "Can we meet?" she asked softly. "I think we both deserve to know the whole truth." We met at a small cafe downtown. She looked tired, her eyes red from crying. "Jake admitted to the affair," she said quietly. "But he downplayed everything. He said you were just trying to ruin his life." I handed her the file of evidence I'd compiled, the texts, the photos, everything. As she flipped through it, her hands shook. "He was going to leave me," she whispered, as if finally admitting it to herself. "He said he needed time to figure things out." "I didn't know he was already planning a new life with your wife." We sat in silence for a while, processing it all. What now? She asked, looking lost. Now, we move forward, I said firmly. They don't get to control our lives anymore. That evening, I served Lisa with separation papers. Her reaction was explosive, screaming, crying, begging. But I stayed calm. It was over, and she knew it. In the end, Jake tried to contact Lisa again, but it was too late. His wife filed for divorce, cutting him off completely. As for me, I focused on rebuilding my life, one day at a time. The affair might have shattered my world, but it didn't break me. I came out stronger, knowing I had done everything I could to expose the truth and reclaim my peace. After receiving the email from Lisa, I realized just how deeply Jake had manipulated her. The promises, the future they'd planned, it was all a lie. He used her, and she fell for it, risking everything we had for a fantasy. Does it change anything for us? She asked softly, her voice breaking. No, I said firmly. I'm sorry you got hurt, but you hurt me first, Lisa. This doesn't erase what you did. She nodded, defeated, and I could see she finally understood. There was no going back. She packed up her things and moved out a few days later. I sold the house soon after. It was just too full of painful memories. In the months that followed, I focused on starting over. I got a small apartment and picked up some hobbies to keep busy. Gradually, I began to rebuild myself, piece by piece. Jake's life fell apart too. He left town, alone and disgraced. Lisa tried reaching out once or twice, but I didn't respond. That chapter of my life was over. I'll never forget what happened, but I've learned to live with it. And maybe that's the best I can hope for. After the dust settled, I tried my best to focus on building a new life. Some days were harder than others, but I kept pushing forward. I found a sense of peace in small routines, morning jogs, weekend hikes, reconnecting with old friends. Slowly, the emptiness Lisa left behind began to fill with new experiences. One afternoon, a message popped up on my phone. It was from Lisa. I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity got the better of me. I've started therapy. I'm not reaching out to ask for anything, but I wanted you to know I'm working on myself. I'm sorry for everything. I hope you're doing okay. I stared at the screen for a long moment. There was no anger left, just a quiet acceptance. I typed back a short response, I'm glad you're getting help. I hope you find what you're looking for. And that was it. The final closure I needed. From that point on, I stopped looking back. I joined a new group at the gym, met people who'd never known me as Matt, the guy who got cheated on, and just focused on being me. One evening, months later, I met someone at a friend's barbecue. Her name was Emily, and we hit it off talking about everything from movies to hiking trails. There was no rush, no expectations. We exchanged numbers and promised to catch up sometime. As I walked away, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a flicker of hope. Maybe there was a new beginning waiting for me after all. Emily and I kept things casual at first, coffee dates, meeting up for hikes, and sharing a few laughs over dinner. There was no pressure, just a refreshing sense of ease I hadn't felt in ages. She didn't pry into my past, and I didn't ask too much about hers. We were both just living in the moment. One evening, after a few months of seeing each other, she invited me over for dinner. As we sat in her cozy apartment, enjoying a simple meal she'd cooked, she looked at me thoughtfully. You know, you don't talk much about your past relationships, she said gently. And that's okay. But I just want you to know, you don't have to hide anything from me. I paused, taking in her words. She wasn't pushing me, she was just giving me the space to share, if I wanted to. And for the first time since everything happened, I felt ready to let someone in. So I told her. Not every detail, but enough to let her know what I'd been through, the betrayal, the hurt, and how I'd slowly started putting myself back together. She listened quietly, nodding every now and then, but never interrupting. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand, her eyes filled with warmth and understanding. I'm so sorry you went through that, Matt. But I'm glad you're here now. I smiled, a genuine smile that reached my eyes. Yeah, me too. As we continued talking, I realized that I wasn't defined by what happened with Lisa anymore. That chapter of my life was over, and now I was starting to write a new one, with someone who truly saw me for who I was. Maybe this time, things would be different. Maybe this was my chance to finally move on. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. Things with Emily continued to grow naturally, and I found myself opening up more than I ever thought I could. Each day with her felt like a fresh start. I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder or second-guessing everything. It was just easy. One evening, we decided to take a weekend trip to a quiet lakeside cabin. As we sat on the porch, watching the sunset reflect off the water, Emily turned to me, her expression serious yet gentle. Do you think you'll ever really be able to let go of what happened? She asked softly. I looked out at the calm lake, feeling a strange sense of calm myself. I think I already have, I said, surprising even myself. It's not about forgetting or pretending it didn't happen. It's just about not letting it control me anymore. Lisa, and everything she did, that was a part of my life. But it's not the whole story. She nodded, squeezing my hand. I'm glad. Because you deserve to be happy, Matt. I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. I think I'm finally starting to believe that. As we sat there, the evening breeze brushing past us, I realized something important. I wasn't defined by the pain or the betrayal. I was more than just a man who got cheated on. I was someone who had faced heartbreak, survived it, and come out stronger on the other side. Emily leaned her head on my shoulder, and I felt a quiet peace settle over me. I didn't know what the future held for us, but for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid. I was ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing that I had the strength to move forward and the courage to love again. And that, more than anything, felt like a true new beginning. As the months went by, Emily and I grew closer. The more time we spent together, the more I realized just how different things were with her. She was genuine, open, and unafraid to share her thoughts and feelings. And being with her felt like rediscovering parts of myself I thought I'd lost forever. One day, I found myself driving past the old house Lisa and I had shared, the one I'd sold after everything fell apart. It looked different now. A new family had moved in, and the yard was filled with the laughter of children playing. Seeing it no longer brought a wave of pain or bitterness. Instead, I felt a sense of distance, like I was looking at a place I used to know but no longer belonged to. It struck me then, I had come full circle. The house, the marriage, the betrayal, they were all pieces of a life I'd left behind. I was a different person now, living a different story. I drove away with a lightness I hadn't felt in years, leaving behind not just a house, but all the lingering shadows of my past. A few days later, Emily and I were sitting in my new apartment, watching a movie. Halfway through, she paused the film and turned to me with a thoughtful look. I've been thinking, she said hesitantly. We've both been through a lot. But what if we stopped looking back and really started planning for the future? I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What do you mean? She smiled softly. Maybe we should think about taking the next step, together. I'm not talking about rushing into anything, but I want to build a future with you, Matt. A fresh start. What do you think? For a moment, I was speechless. It was everything I hadn't dared to hope for, a real chance to move forward with someone who cared about me. Someone who wasn't tied to the pain of my past. I think, I started slowly, my heart swelling, that I'm ready for that. We spent the rest of the evening talking about what that future might look like. And as we made plans, big and small, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop or expecting the past to repeat itself. I had finally let go of everything that had weighed me down. Now, I was free to embrace what lay ahead, with a sense of hope and optimism I thought I'd never feel again. Whatever came next, I knew I'd be okay. Because I had learned to trust myself again. And more importantly, I was ready to open my heart to the possibilities of a new love and a new life. Months passed, and Emily and I continued to build something solid and true. Our conversations deepened, our laughter became more frequent, and we started to weave our lives together in small but meaningful ways. There was no rush, just a steady, genuine connection. One sunny afternoon, we decided to visit a small, cozy house that was up for sale in a quiet neighborhood. We hadn't seriously talked about moving in together yet, but Emily had mentioned how much she loved the area, and I thought it wouldn't hurt to see it. As we wandered through the empty rooms, a thought hit me: this wasn't just about a house. It was about a fresh start, a place that didn't carry any of the baggage from my past. Emily watched me closely as I looked around, her eyes full of hope. "What do you think?" she asked, her voice light but filled with unspoken meaning. I paused, taking in the warmth of the sunlight streaming through the windows, the spacious rooms filled with potential. It felt right. Like the beginning of something new and untouched by old scars. "I think," I said slowly, turning to face her, "that it's time for us to make a place of our own. Together." Her eyes widened in surprise, and then she smiled, one of those genuine, heartfelt smiles that lit up her entire face. "Are you sure?" "Yeah," I nodded, feeling a calm certainty settle over me. "Let's build something new. No more looking back. Just us, moving forward." We stood there in the empty living room, imagining the life we could create in this space. It wasn't just about the house, it was about everything we were choosing to build together. A new chapter, one that wasn't defined by my past pain, but by the hope and love we shared. Later that evening, we signed the initial paperwork. It was a big step, but for the first time, I felt no hesitation. I was ready. We were ready. As we left the house, Emily squeezed my hand. "Thank you for letting me in, Matt. I know it wasn't easy." I looked at her, my heart full. Thank you for being patient, for believing in us. And with that, I knew that I had truly left the past behind. Lisa and the betrayal were just memories now, important lessons that helped shape who I was, but no longer something that held power over me. I had found peace, and more importantly, I had found love again. This time, it was the real thing, built on trust, respect, and a shared vision for the future. And that's how I knew, this wasn't just the end of a story. It was the beginning of a beautiful new one. As Emily and I settled into our new home, life started to take on a different rhythm, one that felt steady and comforting. There was a kind of peace in building a future with someone who truly understood where I'd been and accepted me for who I'd become. We began making small changes around the house, repainting the living room, planting flowers in the backyard, and picking out new furniture together. Every decision, no matter how small, felt like a step further away from the pain of the past and closer to the happiness I'd been seeking. One evening, as we sat on our newly furnished patio, watching the sunset, I found myself reflecting on how far I'd come. It had been a long journey, filled with heartbreak, anger, and uncertainty. But here I was, sitting beside someone who made me feel hopeful again. Do you ever think about her? Emily asked softly, breaking the silence. It wasn't an accusation, just an honest question. I thought about it for a moment. Sometimes, I admitted. Not in the same way, though. I don't feel bitterness or regret anymore. It's more like, she's just someone I used to know. Someone who taught me a painful lesson, but also helped me become who I am now. Emily nodded, her gaze thoughtful. I'm glad you're at peace with it. I know it took a lot to get here. I reached over and took her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. I couldn't have gotten here without you. You showed me that there's still good out there, still love worth fighting for. We sat there, holding hands and letting the tranquility of the moment wrap around us. It felt surreal, being able to talk about everything so openly, without any of the old wounds stinging. I'm proud of you, you know, she said quietly. You didn't let what happened define you. You found a way to rebuild, to move forward. I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. And I'm proud of us. For building something new, something real. As the last light of the day faded and the stars began to twinkle above, I knew one thing for certain, I had finally found peace. I had let go of the past and embraced the possibilities of the future. With Emily by my side, the painful chapter with Lisa felt like a distant memory, a part of my story, but not the ending. Now, I was living a new chapter filled with hope, love, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. A few weeks later, I received a message I didn't expect, an email from Lisa. For a moment, I hesitated, unsure if I should even open it. But then I decided I needed to see what she had to say. The message was short. Matt, I know I have no right to reach out, but I needed to say this. I'm truly sorry for everything. I've been working on myself and trying to understand what led me to hurt you the way I did. I just hope you found some peace and happiness. I wish you the best. Lisa. I stared at the words, feeling a strange mix of emotions. There was no anger, no bitterness, just a sense of closure. I had already moved on, but her apology, though late, felt like the final piece I needed to completely let go. I decided to reply, keeping it brief. Lisa, thank you for reaching out. I've moved on and found happiness again. I hope you have, too. Take care. After hitting send, I leaned back, feeling lighter than I had in years. It wasn't that I needed her apology, but having it marked the end of a chapter I'd long since closed. There was no more unfinished business, no lingering resentment. That evening, I shared the news with Emily. Lisa reached out, I said casually. She apologized. It's over now. I feel free. Emily looked at me, a gentle smile on her lips. I'm glad you got that closure, Matt. It's what you deserved all along. We spent the rest of the night talking about the future, our hopes, dreams, and plans for the life we were building together. There was nothing holding us back now, no shadows from the past creeping in. I realized then that Lisa's chapter in my life had truly ended. All the pain, betrayal, and confusion were behind me. In its place was a sense of acceptance and clarity. I was grateful for what I'd learned, but even more grateful for what I'd found. Emily and I had created something beautiful out of the wreckage of my old life, and I couldn't wait to see where our story would go next. As we sat there, holding hands and imagining all the possibilities ahead of us, I knew one thing for certain, I had finally let go of everything that once weighed me down. I was free to live, love, and embrace this new life without fear. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when Emily and I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. The trees were awash in shades of red and gold, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves underfoot. There was something special about that day, something that made everything feel lighter, brighter. As we strolled hand in hand, Emily glanced at me, a playful smile tugging at her lips. I've been thinking, we've come so far. Maybe it's time to start thinking about the next step. I raised an eyebrow, smiling back. Oh? What do you have in mind? She took a deep breath and then stopped, turning to face me fully. I want us to keep moving forward, to keep building this life we're creating. Maybe it's time we think about starting a family of our own. Her words took me by surprise, but in the best possible way. A family, it was something I hadn't dared to consider for a long time. The idea of bringing new life and love into a world that had once felt so dark suddenly filled me with hope. Are you sure? I asked softly, searching her eyes. She nodded, her gaze steady and sincere. I've never been more sure of anything, Matt. You've shown me what it means to rebuild, to start over. I want to do that together, with you. A rush of emotion washed over me. I pulled her into a tight embrace, feeling the warmth of her love wrap around me like a protective shield. I want that too, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. More than anything. We stood there for a long time, holding each other in the quiet of the afternoon. It felt like everything had come full circle, not just for me, but for both of us. We'd each come from broken places, but we found something real and strong in each other. Later that evening, as we sat in our living room, I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Not for the pain I'd been through, but for the strength it had given me. Without it, I might never have found Emily, never have opened myself up to this kind of happiness. I never thought I'd get here, I admitted, looking into her eyes. But you showed me that life doesn't end just because one part of it falls apart. She smiled, squeezing my hand. No, it doesn't. It just means you have to build something new. And I'm so glad we're doing that together. We didn't need any more words. Sitting there, sharing a quiet moment in our home, I knew that whatever came next, whether it was a family, new adventures, or simply more days like this one, I was ready. This was my new beginning. Our new beginning. The past no longer held me. The future was ours to shape. And I knew, without a doubt, that this was just the start of something beautiful.